Some cars get all the glory. Some get the magazine covers, the movie cameos, the million-dollar auction results. And then there are the cars nobody talks about. The ones that were doing something extraordinary while the rest of the world was busy watching Mustangs and GTOs steal the spotlight. In the 1960s, Japan was quietly building machines that could humiliate European sports cars, survive racing circuits that would destroy lesser vehicles, and redefine what a small engine could actually do. These are the 15 unknown Japanese sleeper cars from the 1960s that history almost forgot. Number 15. The 1962 Mazda Carroll 360 Sport. Before Mazda became synonymous with rotary engines and zoom marketing slogans, they were building something that nobody in America even knew existed. The Carroll 360 Sport was a K car. And if you just rolled your eyes at the words K car, I need you to hold on for a second, because what Mazda crammed into this thing will genuinely surprise you. The Japanese government had created the K car classification in 1949 as a way to get the country moving again after the war. Small engines, small bodies, low taxes. The idea was practical transportation for a nation rebuilding from rubble. But Mazda looked at those regulations and apparently decided practical was boring. The Carroll 360 Sport wore a two-door coupe body that looked like someone had taken a European Gran Turismo and shrunk it in the wash. Clean lines, a fastback roofline, and a stance that communicated speed even when it was standing perfectly still. Under that tiny hood sat a 358 cubic centimeter, four-cylinder engine, producing 18 horsepower. Now, before you laugh, understand that this car weighed less than 1,100 pounds. The power-to-weight ratio was genuinely competitive with machinery that cost 3 times as much. Mazda built fewer than 50,000 Carrolls across all variants, and the sport version was rarer still. Today, finding a surviving example is nearly impossible, which is a tragedy because this little car represented something important. It proved that Japanese engineers weren't just copying Western designs, they were thinking differently from the very beginning. Number 14. The 1965 Datsun Bluebird 1600 SSS. The name SSS stood for Super Sports Sedan, 3 letters that Nissan used to signal something serious hiding inside a completely ordinary-looking family car. And in 1965, ordinary-looking was exactly the point. From the outside, the Bluebird 1600 SSS looked like something your accountant might drive to work. Sensible proportions, tasteful trim, nothing that would make a single head turn on a Tokyo street. That was entirely deliberate. Because underneath that forgettable exterior, Datsun had installed a twin carburetor version of their R-Series engine, producing 90 horsepower. In a car weighing under 2,000 pounds, that was enough to cause serious problems for vehicles with far more glamorous reputations. The SSS competed in the East African Safari Rally, one of the most punishing motorsport events on the planet. Roads that would be classified as natural disasters in most countries. The Bluebird didn't just survive those conditions, it won. In 1966 and 1970, Datsun took overall victory in a race that destroyed purpose-built competition vehicles from European manufacturers who had been doing this for decades. Here is the part that should genuinely embarrass every automaker who dismissed Japan in the 1960s. Those European manufacturers sent their best machinery to East Africa. Datsun sent a car that looked like a family grocery getter. And the Bluebird came home with a trophy? Number 13. The 1963 Honda S500. Soichiro Honda built motorcycles. Everyone knew that. What nobody expected was for him to build a car that used motorcycle engineering principles so aggressively that it made every other small sports car on the market look like it was thinking too small. The S500 arrived in 1963 with a 531 cubic centimeter, 4-cylinder engine featuring dual overhead camshafts and 4 carburetors. 4 carburetors. On an engine smaller than most American lawnmowers, Honda wrung 9,000 revolutions per minute out of this thing, at a time when most production car engines were gasping for breath at 5,000. The official output was 44 horsepower, which sounds modest until you divide it by the S500's weight of just over 1,400 pounds. The power went to the rear wheels through a chain drive system borrowed directly from Honda's motorcycle division. Engineers who thought in terms of motorcycles built a car that behaved like no other car on the road. The chassis was stiff, the handling was surgical, and the engine note at full throttle was an absolute screaming symphony that no V8 from Detroit could replicate. Honda only built about 3,000 S500 Roadsters before replacing it with the larger S600. Today, a clean example is one of the most historically significant small sports cars in existence. This was the car that told the world Honda was serious. Some people just weren't listening yet. Number 12. The 1962 Isuzu Bellel GT. Most people today know Isuzu from pickup trucks and diesel engines. Practical stuff, sensible stuff, the kind of vehicles you buy when you have things to haul and no time for nonsense. So, it comes as a genuine shock to learn that in 1962, Isuzu built a grand touring car that could hold its own against European machinery that cost significantly more and came with a much more prestigious badge on the nose. The Bellel GT was styled with Italian influence, which is not a coincidence. Isuzu had a relationship with European design, thinking that shaped the car's long hood, curved flanks, and purposeful stance. Under that elegant body sat a 1,500 cubic centimeter engine, producing 85 horsepower through a high compression setup and twin carburetors that Isuzu had spent serious engineering resources developing. What made the Bellel GT remarkable wasn't just the power, it was the completeness of the package. Isuzu gave it a 4-speed manual gearbox with precise throws, front disc brakes at a time when most competitors were still using drums, and a suspension setup that could genuinely exploit the engine's output rather than simply surviving it. Production numbers were tiny. Isuzu was not a mass-market performance brand, and the Bellel GT was an expensive gamble that the market never fully embraced, which is exactly why almost nobody talks about it today, and exactly why it belongs on this list. Number 11. The 1961 Datsun Fairlady SP310. The name Fairlady sounds like something from a Broadway musical. Nissan's American sales team certainly thought so, which is why they called it the Datsun 1500 in export markets. But in Japan, it was always the Fairlady. And despite that name, which I'm going to be honest sounds absolutely nothing like a sports car, this machine was the foundation of a bloodline that eventually produced the Z car. That alone should earn it some serious respect. The SP310 used a 1,488 cubic centimeter engine, producing 71 horsepower, which went to the rear wheels through a 4-speed manual transmission. The body was a proper 2-seat roadster with clean, uncluttered lines that owed more to British sports car tradition than anything coming out of Detroit or Stuttgart. What Datsun understood, and what most American buyers completely missed, was that a lightweight roadster with a well-sorted chassis and a free-revving engine could deliver more genuine driving enjoyment than a heavy American convertible with a V8 producing 5 times the horsepower. Driving a Fairlady quickly required skill and commitment. The car rewarded both. Datsun eventually developed the Fairlady into the 2000 Roadster and then into the legendary 240Z. The SP310 is where that story began. You can draw a straight line from this car to one of the most successful sports car nameplates in automotive history. Most people just never bother to look that far back. Number 10. The 1965 Toyota Sports 800. Toyota's reputation in 1965 was built on reliability. Sensible cars that started every morning and never gave their owners any trouble. Which is why the Sports 800 was so completely unexpected that even people who should have known better didn't take it seriously at first. Here is what Toyota did. They took a tiny 696 cubic centimeter 2-cylinder engine and gave it a twin carburetor setup and an overhead valve configuration that produced just 45 horsepower. Then they put it in a body so aerodynamically efficient with a drag coefficient of 0.38 that the car could reach a genuine 100 miles per hour. In 1965, with less than 50 horsepower, the Sports 800, known in Japan as the Publica Sports, weighed just over 1,100 pounds. Toyota achieved that number through obsessive attention to lightweight construction that predated the philosophy by decades. The removable roof panels were stored in the trunk, giving it open-air capability without the structural compromises of a traditional convertible. Only 3,301 examples were ever built, making it genuinely rare, even by the standards of limited production Japanese sports cars of the era. Enzo Ferrari famously said that aerodynamics are for people who can't build engines. Toyota looked at that philosophy and quietly built the best possible argument against it. The Sports 800 was not about raw power, it was about doing more with less, a principle that would define Japanese automotive engineering for the next 60 years. Number 9. The 1967 Mazda Cosmo Sport. Alright, here is where things get genuinely weird, in a good way, in a spectacular, nobody else would dare try this way. In 1967, while Detroit was dropping larger and larger displacement V8 engines into heavier and heavier cars, Mazda unveiled a production vehicle powered by a rotary engine. Not a prototype, not a concept, an actual car you could actually buy. The Cosmo Sport was the first production rotary-powered automobile in history, and it arrived looking like something from a science fiction film. The twin-rotor Wankel engine displaced 982 cubic centimeters and produced 110 horsepower. With a red line that stretched to 7,000 revolutions per minute and power delivery so smooth it felt unlike any piston engine ever built, the Cosmo Sport offered an experience that had no equivalent anywhere in the world. The styling was extraordinary, long, low, and futuristic, with a fastback roofline and details that looked like Mazda's designers had been briefed on what cars would look like in 1985 and then sent back in time to build one. The interior was equally ahead of its era, with instrumentation and switchgear that felt like a deliberate statement of intent. Mazda built only 1,176 Cosmo Sports between 1967 and 1972, making them almost impossibly rare today. Clean examples sell for staggering amounts of money when they surface, which is not often. This was the car that launched Mazda's rotary obsession, an obsession that produced the RX-7, the RX-8, and one of the most passionate fan bases in automotive history. It all started here. Number 8. The 1965 Mitsubishi Colt 1000F. Mitsubishi does not have a strong performance reputation outside of the Lancer Evolution enthusiast community, which makes the Colt 1000F something of a genuine revelation for anyone who digs into 1960s Japanese automotive history. The Colt 1000F was a front-wheel drive compact that Mitsubishi positioned as a practical family vehicle. 2 doors, sensible dimensions, the kind of car that disappears into traffic within seconds of leaving the showroom. But Mitsubishi's engineers had quietly developed a 1,000 cubic centimeter 4-cylinder engine with a twin carburetor setup that produced 51 horsepower. For the displacement, that was a remarkable specific output figure. For the car's weight of under 1,400 pounds, it was enough to make the Colt 1000F seriously fast in the context of early 1960s Japanese motoring. What made this car matter in a larger sense was what it represented technically. Front-wheel drive was still considered an engineering novelty in 1965. Most manufacturers were sticking with rear-wheel drive layouts because it was simpler, better understood, and safer in the conservative business sense. Mitsubishi looked at front-wheel drive and decided the engineering challenges were worth solving. The solutions they developed in building the Colt 1000F fed directly into Mitsubishi's engineering knowledge base for decades afterward. Nobody outside Japan knows this car exists. That is arguably the most Japanese thing about it. Number 7. The 1964 Prince Skyline GT. Now we need to talk about a race that changed everything, and a company that most of the world has never heard of. Prince was an independent Japanese automaker that built refined, sophisticated vehicles aimed at buyers who wanted something genuinely premium. In 1964, Prince entered the first Japan Grand Prix with a version of their Skyline GT, a car that had been designed and sold as an upmarket sedan. They bored out the engine, stiffened the suspension, and showed up at Suzuka expecting to be competitive. What happened next is the stuff of legend. The Skyline GT was running at the front of the race, genuinely threatening the Porsche 904 that had been expected to win without breaking a sweat. A purpose-built European racing machine from one of the most respected performance manufacturers in the world. A Japanese family car with a bored-out engine nearly beat it. Prince lost that race by a margin that still hurts Skyline enthusiasts to discuss. But what Prince proved was more valuable than a trophy. They proved that Japanese engineering could compete at the highest level. Nissan acquired Prince Motor Company in 1966, and with it, acquired the Skyline nameplate, the engineering knowledge, and the racing ambitions. The Nissan Skyline GTR that eventually terrorized motorsport globally owes its existence to what Prince started at Suzuka in 1964. Number 6. The 1965 Hino Contessa 1300 Sprint. Here is a name that will draw a complete blank from virtually every automotive enthusiast outside Japan. Hino. Today, Hino makes trucks, heavy, practical, industrial trucks. But in 1965, Hino built one of the most beautiful and capable small sports cars that the decade produced anywhere in the world, and almost nobody noticed. The Contessa 1300 Sprint wore bodywork designed by Giovanni Michelotti, the Italian designer responsible for some of the most beautiful European machinery of the post-war era. The result was a car that looked like it belonged on the streets of Turin rather than Tokyo, elegant, purposeful, and genuinely stunning from every angle. The engineering matched the appearance. The 1,300 cubic centimeter rear-mounted engine produced 65 horsepower through a twin carburetor setup. And because the engine sat behind the rear axle, the weight distribution created handling characteristics that rewarded skilled drivers who understood what they were working with. The suspension was independent at all four corners, an advanced specification for a car in this price range and era. Hino was absorbed by Toyota in 1966, and production of the Contessa line ended shortly after. The Sprint version is extraordinarily rare today. Some automotive historians consider it among the most significant forgotten cars of the 1960s. They are not wrong. This is the car that proves beautiful design and serious engineering don't require a famous badge. Sometimes they just require the right engineers and the freedom to build something remarkable. Number 5. The 1963 Datsun Bluebird 410 SSS. We already talked about what the Bluebird became in the hands of rally drivers, but the story of the 410 SSS deserves its own chapter, because this particular car was doing something that should have gotten more attention than it ever received. In 1963, Nissan introduced the Bluebird 410 with a body style that owed its aerodynamic profile to extensive wind tunnel development. This was not common practice for an economy car manufacturer in 1963. Wind tunnels were expensive. Wind tunnels were for Ferrari and Porsche, and manufacturers with racing programs that justified the cost. Nissan looked at that thinking and apparently decided it was wrong. The SSS variant got the twin carburetor version of Nissan's engine, producing 67 horsepower in a car weighing under 1,800 pounds. The suspension was specifically tuned for the SSS, with stiffer springs and revised damper settings that turned the Bluebird from a competent family car into something that could be driven with real commitment on a winding road. Japanese domestic market buyers understood what the SSS badge meant. They bought these cars and drove them with enthusiasm on the mountain passes that defined spirited driving culture in 1960s Japan. The Touge driving tradition that eventually gave birth to drift culture and produced some of the greatest driver-focused cars in history traces part of its roots back to machines, exactly like the Bluebird 410 SSS. A 45-year-old economy car helped build an entire driving culture. That is not nothing. Number 4. The 1966 Honda S800. If the S500 was Honda proving they could build a sports car, the S800 was Honda proving they could build a great one. The difference between those two statements is more significant than it might appear. Honda took everything they had learned from the S500 and the S600 that followed it, and they applied 2 years of development, competition experience, and engineering refinement to produce the S800. The result was a car that could genuinely compete with the British roadsters that dominated the affordable sports car market in the mid-1960s. This was not a coincidence. Honda specifically targeted the MG and Triumph and Sprite buyers who had never considered a Japanese sports car, because the concept of a Japanese sports car barely existed yet. The S800 used an 840 cubic centimeter four-cylinder engine with dual overhead camshafts, 4 carburetors, and a red line of 9,500 revolutions per minute. In 1966, 9,500 RPM from a production engine in a car you could drive to the grocery store The output was 70 horsepower, which in an 1,150-pound car produced performance numbers that left the MG Midget and Triumph Spitfire in genuinely embarrassing situations. Honda built the S800 in both roadster and coupe form, with the coupe offering slightly better aerodynamics and a marginally higher top speed. The car competed successfully in racing events across Europe and Japan, accumulating a competition record that should have made it famous. It didn't, quite. But among people who know, the S800 is spoken about with the kind of reverence usually reserved for cars that cost 10 times as much. That should tell you everything. Number 3. The 1967 Toyota 2000 GT. Now here is one that automotive enthusiasts might actually recognize. And to those people, I want to say this. You think you know this car. You don't fully know this car. Let me explain. The Toyota 2000 GT is sometimes called Japan's first supercar, which is accurate enough as far as it goes. What the description misses is the sheer audacity of what Toyota was attempting. In 1967, Toyota was known for making the Corona and the Crown, sensible, dependable, pleasantly boring transportation for sensible, dependable, pleasantly boring people. And then they unveiled this. The 2000 GT wore a body of such extraordinary beauty that when James Bond used a converted convertible version in the film You Only Live Twice, nobody laughed. Nobody questioned whether this Japanese car belonged in a spy film alongside Aston Martins and Ferraris. It just obviously belonged there. Under the bodywork sat a 2-liter twin-cam 6-cylinder engine, developed in collaboration with Yamaha, producing 150 horsepower and spinning to 8,000 revolutions per minute with a mechanical precision that the engine note alone communicated. The chassis was a backbone-type frame with independent suspension at all 4 corners and 4-wheel disc brakes that provided stopping power completely commensurate with the car's performance. Toyota built only 337 examples. 337. For a car of this significance and this beauty, Carroll Shelby tested one and reportedly said it was one of the finest sports cars he had ever driven. Road and Track called it among the world's best sports cars, and Toyota never really told anyone it existed, only in Japan. Number 2. The 1965 Nissan Silvia CSP 311. The nameplate that eventually gave us the S13, the S14, and the S15 that dominated drift culture globally started here. In a car so rare and so beautiful that most people who worship the Silvia name have never seen an original example in person. The CSP 311 was Nissan's attempt to build a proper grand touring coupe that could represent Japanese automotive ambition on the world stage. The styling was handled in-house at Nissan, and the result was a long-nosed fastback coupe with proportions so elegantly judged that it looked like it should cost considerably more than it did. The details were exquisite. The way the roofline descended, the careful management of the body surfaces, the overall sense that every line had been considered rather than simply sketched. Mechanically, the CSP 311 used a 1,500 cubic centimeter engine, producing 90 horsepower through a twin carburetor setup and a 5-speed gearbox, which was an advanced specification for a 1965 production car from any manufacturer anywhere in the world. Here is the number that stops most people cold when they hear it. Nissan built exactly 554 CSP 311 Silvias between 1965 and 1968. 554 total in the entire world. Finding one today is the automotive equivalent of finding a particular grain of sand on a particular beach. Collectors who have spent years searching for clean examples understand exactly what I mean. This car established the Silvia DNA. The combination of elegant styling, driver-focused engineering, and mechanical sophistication that defined every great Silvia that followed. The lineage from this car to the S15 is unbroken, which makes the CSP 311 not just a historical curiosity, but the founding document of one of the most important sports car families Japan ever produced. Number 1. The 1964 Prince Skyline GTB. At the top of this list sits a car that combined everything remarkable about 1960s Japanese performance engineering into one extraordinary package, then went racing and nearly broke European motorsports' confidence in itself. After the near miss at the Japan Grand Prix in 1964 with the standard Skyline GT, Prince's engineers went back to work with a specific mission. They were not going to get that close to beating a Porsche 904 and walk away satisfied with a moral victory. The GTB was their answer. Prince fitted the Skyline GTB with a 2-liter inline 6-cylinder engine borrowed from their Gloria luxury sedan and reworked it with twin carburetors, a higher compression ratio, and revised camshaft timing to produce 125 horsepower. They coupled it with a 4-speed gearbox with ratios specifically chosen for circuit racing and installed it in a body that had been aerodynamically refined based on the data from the Japan Grand Prix. The suspension was completely reworked. The braking system was upgraded with discs at the front. In 1965, the GTB returned to competition and won its class. A Japanese car from a Japanese manufacturer that most of the world had never heard of, competing against European machinery on a circuit, winning on merit, on engineering, on the quality of the thinking that had gone into every component. But here is what makes the GTB the single most important car on this list. When Nissan acquired Prince in 1966, the engineers who built the GTB became Nissan engineers. The knowledge they had accumulated, the racing philosophy they had developed, the understanding of what a Skyline could be pushed to achieve, all of it transferred to Nissan. Those engineers spent the following years developing the Skyline further, eventually producing the Hakosuka GTR in 1969, which went on to win 50 consecutive races in Japanese touring car competition. 50 consecutive victories, without a single loss. Built on a foundation that traces directly back to the GTB and the ambition of a small Japanese automaker that looked at a Porsche 904 at Suzuka in 1964 and decided losing was unacceptable. The 1964 Prince Skyline GTB didn't just produce a great car, it produced a dynasty. And that is why it sits at number 1. These 15 machines represent something more significant than a list of forgotten specifications and obscure production numbers. They represent the beginning of a philosophy. Japanese engineers in the 1960s were working with smaller budgets, smaller engines, and smaller reputations than their American and European counterparts. And they responded by thinking harder, engineering more carefully, and refusing to accept that limitations were permanent. The world spent most of the 1960s ignoring what was happening in Japan. By the 1970s, it was too late to ignore it anymore. These are the cars that started that conversation.